Amid erratic tariff policy, U.S. President Trump says he will unveil separate tariffs on semiconductors in the near future. This comes 2 days after his administration exempted smartphones and other electronics from its reciprocal tariffs. Exports of tech products reached over $20 billion last month, up nearly 10% from a year ago, as more businesses brace for the U.S. reciprocal tariffs. In a race to the top office, rival parties set roles to choose their presidential candidates, but both are met with protests over the way they are implemented. We take a closer look. It's April 14th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. The cloud of uncertainty persists over the U.S. erratic trade policy. The Trump administration earlier announced that smartphones, laptops, and other electronics were exempt from its reciprocal tariffs. But now the American leader says it's only temporary, and he will announce tariffs on imported semiconductors in the coming days. Lee Jung-hoo has our top story.
U.S. President Donald Trump signaled that he would unveil new tariffs on imported semiconductors over the next week. He announced this to reporters aboard Air Force One on Sunday local time, adding that certain companies in the sector may be granted some flexibility.
But the tariffs will be in place in the not-distant future because, as you know, like we did with steel, like we did with automobiles, like we did with aluminum, which are now fully on, we'll be doing that with semiconductors, with chips, and numerous other things. And that'll take place in the very near future.
He did not clarify whether products such as smartphones would be exempted, but emphasized again how a certain degree of flexibility will be shown. This comes as he and his key trade officials made it clear that his administration's newly announced exemptions for reciprocal tariffs on electronic products would be partially or completely reversed in the coming weeks. After a technical guidance issued late Friday, Washington issued an exemption on select electronics such as smartphones, laptops, personal computers, servers, and semiconductor equipment, easing the burden on Samsung Electronics and Apple, among others. Trump also took to his social media page on Sunday to clarify that tariffs would still be imposed on Chinese goods, specifically the existing 20% fentanyl tariffs. He also stressed that the U.S. administration is taking a look at semiconductors and the whole electronic supply chain in upcoming national security tariff reviews.
So what he's doing is he's saying they're exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, but they're included in the semiconductor tariffs, which are coming in probably a month or two. So these are coming soon.
Speaking to CNN on Sunday, White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett said the items subject to Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act have always been excluded from reciprocal tariffs, and a separate review will be conducted to determine necessary measures to protect the United States. He added that the tariff review of semiconductors has to do with broader concerns of U.S. dependence on Chinese-made imports, and that there is a, quote, very uncomfortable amount of Chinese input in U.S. weapons systems. 이수진, Arirang News.
Against this backdrop, acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo announced that the United States is moving swiftly toward trade negotiations with Seoul, following a temporary suspension of additional rates on reciprocal tariffs. On Monday, Han said at a meeting on economic security that Mr. Trump has reportedly instructed his team to immediately begin negotiations with 3 countries: South Korea, Japan, and India. He also revealed that a virtual meeting between Seoul and Washington regarding Alaska's liquefied natural gas project is expected to develop concrete terms within the next couple of days. Exports of Korean ICT products expanded almost 10% on-year in March, ahead of the U.S. tariff campaign, led by chips and display panels. Moon Ji-young has the latest numbers.
Rebounds in chip and display sales led to an increase in South Korea's tech exports last month, according to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Monday. ICT exports in March reached almost $20.6 billion, up 9.4% compared to the same month the previous year. Month-on-month data shows that tech exports surged by 24%, while the trade balance saw an increase of a whopping 48% during the same period. Exports of major tech items such as chips, displays, cell phones, and computers have all risen together for the first time in 8 months. Semiconductor exports increased by nearly 12% year-on-year, driven by rising demand for high-value memory chips such as high-bandwidth memory and double data rate 5. This growth is attributed to expanded investments in AI servers and a reduction in companies' memory inventories. The display sector rebounded by 1.3% after 8 months, thanks to the launch of new mobile phones. Experts and officials from the Trade Ministry attribute these rebounds to preemptive measures taken by leading companies to secure their inventories in anticipation of reciprocal tariffs imposed by the U.S.
Certainly, after the announcement of the tariffs imposition, there was a trend where companies tried to pull forward their shipments for the following month, and the month after that, before tariffs were increased.
Exports of mobile phones soared by nearly 15%, while computers jumped over 28%, both showing double-digit growth. By country, shipments to the U.S., Vietnam, and Japan performed strongly last month, driven by robust demand for chips. In contrast, exports to China, South Korea's top export destination, fell by over 12% due to decreased demand for chips and computers. There was also a drop in exports to Europe. Meanwhile, ICT imports totaled over $12.2 billion, resulting in a positive ICT trade balance. 문지영, Arirang News.
The first hearing in the criminal trial of former President Yoon Suk-yeol took place at a local court today, where there was an exchange of arguments between him and prosecutors. The former leader appeared before the court 10 days after he was removed from office. Shin Ha-young reports.
Former President Yoon Suk-yeol denied charges of insurrection at the first hearing of his criminal trial on Monday. During the hearing, prosecutors pointed to Yoon's actions leading up to his martial law declaration, claiming he aimed to undermine the constitutional order to foment a coup. Yoon pushed back, claiming the martial law declaration was intended as a peaceful message to the public and not a coup d'etat. His legal team asked the court to dismiss the case, arguing that the indictment was unlawful. It brought up the issue of the detention period, stating the indictment was filed after it had expired. Two key witnesses, including Cho Sung-hyun from the Army's Capital Defense Command, testified at the hearing. Cho said he was ordered to send troops to remove lawmakers from the National Assembly on the night of the martial law order, repeating his earlier testimony given at the Constitutional Court in February. Yoon arrived at the Seoul Central District Court on Monday morning as he is required to attend the trial in person. This comes 10 days after he was removed from office. The court did not allow media filming in the courtroom, explaining that the request came in too late for the appropriate judicial procedures to be followed. However, it added that if the request is submitted again for the next hearing, the court would review it. To convict Yoon of insurrection, prosecutors must prove that he intentionally tried to undermine the constitutional order by using the military. If convicted, he could face life imprisonment or even the death penalty. The next hearing is scheduled for next Monday. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
We're now counting down 50 days to the early presidential election. Rival political parties have now set their own primary rules, but they have met with protests by some. Kim Do-yeon explains why.
South Korea's major political parties are gearing up for their presidential primaries, but controversy is brewing for both sides, with candidates dropping out. The Democratic Party of Korea has previously announced rules for the competition. 50% eligible DP members and the other 50 by an open survey were the issue. In the past two presidential primaries, anyone who signed up in advance could participate in the voting, regardless of party membership history. This is why Kim Do-gan said it's against tradition and the party's spirit and dropped out of the race on Monday. Kim Dong-yeon also said the rules aren't fair but accepted the changes. DP's election committee on Monday brushed off the claims and started its first meeting.
The early election needs to be an answer to the call of those who fill the streets. The committee will be fairer, transparent, and more stable than ever for this primary.
Despite the controversy, a new high-profile participant entered the race on Sunday, former Gyeongsangnam-do Governor Kim Kyung-soo. As for the rules, he accepted them. But the DP's frontrunner Lee Jae-myung didn't comment on them. He continued to promote his candidacy by visiting an AI chips company on Monday, pledging 100 trillion won, or around $73 billion of investment into AI industries. Meanwhile, the People Power Party's official registration started on Monday, with the deadline set for Tuesday.
I know it's tough times, but I ask good candidates to come forward. Our party's primary principle is clear. All candidates will be at the same starting point and under the same standards.
However, the issues seen with this rival party were seen in the PPP as well. Its tactical voting prevention measures, asking respondents for the party they support during open survey and excluding those who support opposition, were the problem, with some saying that to expand support, this measure has to be scrapped. However, the rules stuck, and former lawmaker Yoo Seung-min said he will not be joining the PPP primary in protest. In addition, Seoul Mayor Oh Se-won also declared that he is not joining the PPP primary, but didn't specifically mention that the decision came in protest of the rules. On Monday, however, Hong Jun-pyo, the latest Daegu mayor, joined the race as he had previously announced. He focused on the need to beat DP's Lee Jae-myung and that he's the only candidate who was able to compete with Lee. Now the public waits to see if the candidates who dropped out will still run as independents. With such a short election season, this could have impacts on both parties. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, for the first time in over 80 years, capital Seoul recorded snowfall in mid-April as winter made an unexpected call. Bae Yoon-ji has more.
Snow piled up on flowers and trees as South Korea experienced unseasonably cold mid-April weather. Over 10 centimeters of snow accumulated in parts of Gangwon-do province on Sunday. Light snow and hail also fell in the capital area as it went through an unusual spring chill. Snow of up to 0.6 centimeters was recorded in central Seoul between Saturday night and Sunday morning, making it the first time in 81 years that the city saw snow in April. This is mainly because of cold Arctic air passing through the Korean peninsula. The weather turned turbulent as the lingering cold air from above clashed with a mild spring breeze on the ground, causing gusty winds and hail. And strong winds battered the country over the weekend, leading to widespread damage. In Jeju, the winds damaged roofs and toppled trees. And in Busan, winds of up to 30 meters per second brought down signboards and caused power outages. Also in the capital area at Incheon Airport, a tug vehicle crashed into an aircraft on the ground, leading to flight delays. The National Weather Service says strong winds and falling temperatures are forecast for the coming days.
Damage from strong winds is expected until Monday, and temperatures will start to go up from Wednesday. We're expecting to see temperatures return to normal starting late this week.
Rain or snow is expected across the country until Tuesday, before spring warmth returns later this week. Bae Yoon-ji, Arirang News.
Despite peace talks, Russia has renewed its air assault against Ukraine, this time attacking its northeastern city, killing dozens of people. This has sparked international criticism, including the U.S. Byun Ye-young covers the latest attack.
Rubble and bodies were left among the ashes and smoke after 2 Russian ballistic missiles struck the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy on Sunday. The attack killed 34 people, including 2 children, and left 117 injured in one of the deadliest attacks in the conflict of the year. Sumy, located just over 25 kilometers from the Russian border, has endured a wave of missile strikes in recent weeks. The missiles hit the city center just after 10 a.m. local time on Palm Sunday, as residents were attending church services, one of the busiest religious days of the year, according to Ukraine's economy minister.
There is no military base, no military people, center of the city. What could there be possibly? There is no air defense here. There is nothing here. They're just erasing the nation. This is genocide. How can you call it any different?
The attack came despite a U.S. brokered agreement between Russia and Ukraine last month to halt strikes on each other's energy infrastructure. On Sunday, President Volodymyr Zelensky strongly condemned the latest attack, stating that only filthy scum were capable of such actions, and urged the international community to respond with action.
Only pressure, only decisive action can change this. Every Russian ballistic missile, every cruise missile, every Russian Shahed, every guided bomb strike not only our people, not only our communities, but also diplomacy and the political efforts of everyone who is truly trying to bring this to an end.
Reactions quickly poured in from global leaders. Keith Kellogg, Donald Trump's envoy for Ukraine, wrote on X that the missile strike crosses any line of decency and reiterated that the U.S. president was working hard to end the war. European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, took to social media to express support for Ukraine, condemn Russia's actions, and call for a full ceasefire. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Over in Oman this past Saturday, officials from the U.S. and Iran addressed the latter's nuclear weapons ambitions, with more talks scheduled for this coming weekend. Park Gon-woo reports.
Nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran are set to resume this weekend, but with potential pitfalls ahead, including the agenda and format. The first round that took place Saturday in Oman was participated in by U.S. and Iranian diplomats and conducted indirectly through Oman's mediation, marking the highest-level meeting between the two nations since 2018. After the talks ended, the two sides spoke for a few minutes face-to-face. On Sunday, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called the talks constructive, but also said the U.S. continues to seek a diplomatic resolution to Iran's nuclear program. And he added that the U.S. military stands ready to go deep and big if talks fail. U.S. President Donald Trump also commented.
And we'll be making a decision on Iran very quickly.
That came after Trump said the day before that things were going okay. Iran on Sunday also described the first round of talks with the U.S. as productive, but maintained its stance of keeping the agenda and format the same amid remaining tensions.
What is clear at this stage is that the negotiations are indirect, and from our perspective, are solely about the nuclear issue, and with the necessary will to reach an agreement based on equality.
That comes as the U.S. is reportedly looking to broaden the agenda to include Iran's ballistic missile program and its support for the Axis of Resistance, a network of militant groups opposed to Israel. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, paramilitaries in Sudan killed more than 200 civilians over 2 days of attacks last week on refugee camps and around the city of Al-Fashir in the Darfur region. The UN said the rapid support forces continued killing at 2 large camps in Zemzem and Abu Shuk, which protected as many as 700,000 displaced civilians. All 9 medical staff members of Relief International who were operating the clinic inside Zemzem camp were murdered. The civil war between the army and the paramilitary forces began almost 2 years ago and has seen tens of thousands killed and 12 million people displaced. Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us is our sports editor, Paul Neat. Welcome.
Hello.
Let's start with baseball. In MLB over the weekend, Lee Jung-hoo had what was probably his best game yet.
Yes, you're right. Not one but two home runs against the New York Yankees. Lee Jung-hoo, an outfielder for the San Francisco Giants on Sunday, hit 2 home runs and recorded 4 runs in a 5-4 win over the Yankees in New York. This was the first time that he'd hit more than 1 home run in a single game, and 4 RBIs is also a career best. The highlight was his second home run, a 3-run homer, with the Giants down 3-1 in the 4th inning, helping to begin the fight back. In total, in what were his first visits to Yankee Stadium, Lee Jung-hoo batted 4 for 9 with 3 home runs in 3 matches with 7 RBIs and 5 runs scored. A total of 3 home runs and 11 RBIs for the season are already personal best for him. He managed just 2 home runs in 37 matches last year, but seems to have put his injury concerns behind him and is having a successful season.
Moving on to golf now, a very impressive finish for Im Seong-jae at the Masters.
Yes, that's right. He finished tied for 5th and only 4 strokes behind the winner, Rory McIlroy. Im recorded a 3-under-69 in the final round on Sunday at Augusta for an overall score of 7-under-281. He went into the final day in 10th place, but rose up the rankings thanks to 4 birdies, an eagle and 3 bogeys. It was Masters number 6 for him, and his best finish is 2nd in 2020. Meanwhile, Rory McIlroy was able to complete a career Grand Slam by overcoming Justin Rose in a playoff to win the Masters. McIlroy called it 14 years in the making, having come close in 2011, but blew a 4-shot lead in the final round.
And finally, to short track speed skating, a rising star is heading to the Winter Olympics.
Yes, a high schooler, 17-year-old Im Jong-un. On Sunday, he won the Korean Olympic short-track speed skating trials, clinching a spot at the 2026 Winter Games in Italy. The high school senior dominated across 2 rounds, edging out 2022 Olympic champion Hwang Dae-hon, who also reaches Milan in 2026. Also making the men's team, Shin Dong-min, who will make his senior debut after finishing 3rd. And on the women's side, World Cup champion Kim Gil-lee finished 1st, with No Do-hee close behind. Chae Min-jong, a 3-time Olympic gold medalist, had already secured her spot with the world title. All eyes are now on Italy, where Korea's newest and brightest stars will take to the ice.
Right, indeed, a lot to look forward to. Thank you for the wrap-up.
Thank you.
We've been experiencing some pretty wild weather since the weekend, with rain and even snow sweeping across the country with the gusty winds. Well, there has been more rain nationwide, which could linger into tomorrow at dawn. Meanwhile, mountainous regions in Gangwon-do province could see some snow instead. Then highs were 5 to 10 degrees lower than norms today, but as the weather clears up tomorrow, daytime highs will return to near average. But those of you who are heading for the work or early in the morning will still need a winter jacket. Now, Seoul starts off at 4 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 0 degrees. Then highs will jump to the mid-teens in most parts, topping out at 16 degrees Celsius here in the capital and Chuncheon. Gyeongju, Busan, Daegu will see a high of 17 degrees under bright skies with decent air quality. Then things will get much warmer and sunnier as we head into the weekend. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
어느 날 바닷가에 갔더니 제가 촬영했던 화장품 케이스들이 떠내려왔더라고요. 그거를 보고 많은 생각을 했어요. 그 어마어마한 양의 쓰레기는 거의 상상을 할 수 없을 정도로 진짜 경이로울 정도로 많습니다. 그런 것들이 이제 너무 이질적으로 보였죠. 그 식물들이 거기서 자라고 싶어서 자란 건 아니거든요. 우리가 버린 쓰레기에서 자란 이 식물들도 우리가 만든 환경인데 어떻게 우리가 그 운명에 대해서 관여를 한 거거든요. 우리가 만든 이 환경에 대해서는 인간이 이거를 관여를 해야 된다고 묻잖아요. 내가 이렇게 한다고 해서 이게 달라지는 건 아니거든요, 세상이. 세상에 당신들이 썼던 이런 물건들에서 이 자라는 식물에 대해서 좀 고민을 해봐라. 자연에 들어가서 주변을 잠깐만 관심 있게 둘러보시면 구석구석에 엄청난 쓰레기들이 많습니다. 당신이 하나 주운 게 수천 마리의 종을 생명을 살릴 수가 있습니다. 나는 쓰레기 더미에서 생명을 발견하는 그리너다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gan. As tensions rise over trade and security, the United States is taking a calculated pause, delaying reciprocal tariffs on allies for 3 months and signaling a new approach to negotiations. But the stakes are high for South Korea as President Trump is pushing for a sweeping package deal, tying tariffs and defense cost sharing together under one diplomatic umbrella. With acting President Han Duck-soo stepping into delicate talks and top U.S. lawmakers and officials poised to visit Seoul, questions loom. Could this be a breakthrough or a pressure tactic? And what strategies can Seoul deploy as it navigates trade, security, and shifting alliances just weeks before a new administration takes office? For more on this, we invite Lee Jung-hoo, professor of Korean National Diplomatic Academy, here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor.
Good evening.
And also joining us online is Christophe Godin, professor of political science at Kookmin University. Great to have you, Professor.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
So let's start our discussion with Professor Min. So the U.S. has announced a 3-month delay in implementing reciprocal tariffs on countries other than China. It also excluded like electronic products such as smartphones and computers from the tariff list. What's the rationale, do you think, behind this?
I think that the Trump government uses tariffs for 2 purposes, reducing the trade deficits and promoting the revival of manufacturing industries in the United States. To reduce the trade deficit, the President Trump perceives that U.S. has long been harmed by unfair trade practices on the international stage. So he's trying to reduce the trade deficit by using various tariffs such as universal baseline tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, and item-by-item tariffs. Specifically, he's trying to reduce the trade deficit by imposing a 10% baseline the tariffs on all imported items. And he's also trying to reduce the trade deficit by imposing reciprocal tariffs on countries with large trade surplus with the United States and to create a more favorable trade environment for U.S. through bilateral negotiations with the countries. Meanwhile, the tariffs are being used as a way of revitalizing manufacturing industries in the country. The previous Biden government tried to promote investments and expand the manufacturing facilities in the United States by providing subsidies to the companies. But President Trump, as you know, has a negative perception of subsidies and believes that if tariffs are imposed, companies will build factories in the United States in order to avoid the tariffs. In fact, since the beginning of the second Trump government, many companies have promised to build factories within the United States. So as the Trump government is rapidly imposing tariffs on a wide range of items, the global community is worried that it's going to make a negative impact, huge impact on the global economy. But despite the concerns, President Trump is unlikely to stop using tariffs aggressively, and the world is watching to see what the outcome his experiments will bring about.
Right, so it was a strategic pause, not really a retreat. Now let's also bring in Professor Godin to the conversation. So this 3-month grace period puts a spotlight on possibilities for renegotiations. On April 9th, acting President Han Duck-soo and President Trump held their first phone call. Would you consider this conversation a meaningful step towards establishing direct communication between the 2 leaders?
If I'm a bit blunt, first, it will need to be established whether it is possible or not to have a meaningful conversation with President Trump. From what Professor Min just explained, I think the key takeaway here is the concept of experiment. President Trump very obviously is trying some sort of point-to-point navigation. He doesn't care about what the rest of the world thinks of him, basically. His only concern is about how beneficial all this could be or not to the U.S. economy. So what we see now is that every week, almost every day, if not every hour, he's trying something new. He's trying something new, and as you can see last week, the reaction of stock exchange markets was catastrophic. Then eventually, he was forced, if not to retreat, at least to call for a sort of truce on his policy. So, in fact, again, if I am a bit blunt now, President Han Duck-soo, as an acting president, is only here for a couple months more, and so there isn't much he can do about the future, unfortunately. But the good news is that, on the other hand, I am not sure there is that much to be done with President Trump. For instance, last week, many other world leaders from France, from Germany, from other Western nations, tried to call him to make him hear reason. And as you must have heard, President Trump just perceived him as them trying to, quote unquote, kiss his ass. So these are challenging times for political science, because now we've got the US that is the largest democracy there is in the world, and this democracy is basically headed by a president that doesn't seem to care a lot about his allies. And first, we need to face this fact coldly, seeing Trump for what he is and not for what we wish he were. We need to look at him for what he is. And what he is quite an unpleasant truth to look at.
Right, so it is indeed a very tough situation for a lot of political leaders at this point. Now, going back to the talks with South Korea's acting president, Han Duck-soo, Trump has mentioned one-stop shopping, suggesting his intention to bundle tariff negotiations and defense cost sharing into a single package. Professor Min, what kind of message is he trying to send with this approach?
Yeah, people are talking about his message. Basically, I think it's a good news to hear that the two leaders had a phone call recently, because there was a growing concern in South Korea that the South Korean government was failing to communicate with the United States counterparts at the top level. And it was known that the two leaders talked several issues like a trade balance, tariffs, energy and shipbuilding cooperation, and defense payment. And as you mentioned, it was reported that President Trump preferred to have one-stop shopping to make a package deal for both the tariff and defense cost-sharing negotiations. Personally, I think that President Trump want to put all negotiating items on the table together and make negotiations and reach the agreements as quickly as possible. And if things go well as he wanted, President Trump will show off such outcomes to his domestic audience. But I also think that President Trump knows that it would be hard to make a package deal for tariff and burden sharing negotiations. As you know, Korean people are very sensitive to the outcome of burden sharing negotiations, and it takes a relatively long time before reaching an agreement. And the two countries, South Korea and U.S., already finished the deal for the next 5 years, 2026 to 2030, last year. So it is expected that Korean people will feel uncomfortable when U.S. requests a renegotiation. And it would not be possible for the renegotiation to make a progress or reach a final agreement under the current transition government, which will last only 2 months. So it would be more realistic and pragmatic for the two countries to just focus on making progress in the tariff negotiation under the current transition government and allow the new South Korean government to take the responsibility for their burden sharing negotiations.
Right, so we'll have to wait a little bit more for a stronger decision on that. But like Professor Min has just touched upon, this is the first time the U.S. has linked tariffs and defense cost sharing. And of course, the South Korean government remains cautious about this, saying national security matters like defense should be separately addressed from trade. Professor Gorang, what are your thoughts? What kind of strategy do you think is needed to navigate this so-called package deal?
Well, first, you're very right to emphasize that it is the first time the U.S. is linking security deals with trade issues. But something I would like to mention is that Trump is actually saying the exact same thing to Europe. He's been arguing for months and months that NATO was almost single-handedly funded by America and that the U.S. was financing for Europe's nuclear umbrella with no clear benefit from the American point of view. So something interesting here is that Trump, as a businessman, is actually trying to reset American diplomacy all over the world, in Europe as well as in Asia and everywhere else, on the very, very same premises, on the very, very same principles. These principles being business, being money. He doesn't care for democracy. He cares solely for the benefits to be had here. So now to answer your question more directly. As Professor Min just explained, now in Korea, the acting president and the government are just here for a couple months. So there isn't much that Korea can do for the time being. But I think that it is a blessing in disguise. Why? Because the situation is changing almost day by day. So if Trump is linking the economy and defense, and if for the moment, in the lack of a new president, Korea cannot make any significant move in order to implement significant policy changes in terms of defense, etc., what it means is that Korea can buy time. And in these troubled times we live in, I think wait and see. What Trump is conducting, Professor Min very rightfully argues that Trump is trying to conduct some sort of worldwide policy experiment. Experiments are dangerous, especially when conducted by people like President Trump. So what Korea can do now is buying time. And I think it is a strategy that President Han is trying to implement, and for the moment, quite successfully, because it's never good in times of crisis to be on the front line. And for the moment, fortunately, Korea is not.
Right, especially this tariffs, since these tariffs are not only addressing South Korea, so we can actually have time to wait and see. Now, Professor Min, South Korea's head of trade negotiations at the Trade Ministry visited the U.S. for talks last week, and it's reported that South Korea put LNG imports and shipbuilding cooperation on the table. How effective might these proposals be in the broader negotiations in terms of tariffs?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier today, the Trump government is using tariffs to reduce its trade deficits and expand manufacturing facilities and make more high-paying jobs within the country. So what South Korean government offers needed to contribute to reducing the U.S. trade deficits and creating high-paying jobs in the country. More importantly, South Korea also needed to consider its domestic situations. So South Korean government should consider if its offer to the United States does not make a negative impact on its economic and industrial basis in South Korea, like losing domestic jobs and moving out core technology production process. So I think that energy cooperation like oil and natural gas imports from U.S. and participating in Alaska LNG pipeline projects would be effective to achieve what both U.S. and South Korea want from the deal. Specifically, by exporting more energy to South Korea, U.S. will reduce its trade deficits with South Korea, and it will also create high-paying jobs for U.S. people from the LNG project. Meanwhile, South Korea can diversify its energy supply and importing American energy and can have useful negotiating cards with the United States. And along with energy cooperation, shipbuilding cooperation between the two countries can also be effective for their tariff negotiation. As you know, U.S. badly wants to enhance its shipbuilding capabilities as a way of checking the rise of China. Unfortunately, however, the American shipbuilding industry has lost its competitiveness to the Chinese counterparts in terms of building, repairing, and operating battleships and the commercial ships. So it wants its reliable ally like South Korea, who has the world-class shipbuilding capabilities, to help the U.S. restore its shipbuilding capacity. And there is no doubt that it would be a very useful negotiating card for South Korea.
Right, so investment and cooperation in other areas would be helpful. President Trump has floated the idea of reducing or even withdrawing U.S. troops from South Korea, but key figures in the U.S. government like U.S. Forces Korea Commander Javier Brunson have recently voiced opposition to such a move. Professor Godang, how could these differing views within America shape the upcoming negotiations?
In fact, you're very right to mention General Xavier Benson, because there were a lot of other prominent voices in America that were very adamant about voicing their concerns about the new path that President Trump is trying to impose on U.S. diplomacy. Even right after his inauguration in January, I'd like you to remember that he stripped General Mark Milley, that is one of the top officers in the American army, basically, he even stripped him of his security clearance. So right now, in fact, what I think is that eventually what has happened with tariffs, that is Trump's being forced to somehow retreat. The same is about to happen eventually about defense policies, because these policies basically make no sense. If U.S. troops were to be all sent back to America, the most direct consequence would be that China would eventually take over. China would establish itself as the dominant hegemon in the region. And a sure thing is that Trump does not want that. So here I think it is most important not to panic, because eventually the dust will settle. In the case of South Korea, as Professor Min just mentioned, the South Korean economy is solid, and the South Korean economy is producing a lot of commodities, typically semiconductors, that will be exempt from tariffs, from what it seems. So I am not sure the shock will be that harmful on the Korean economy, and even more so, if China is to take the blow, and it seems that China and the US are about to waging an actual trade war now, then in this case, you could imagine that other Asian economies like Korea could be benefiting from this situation. What I think is that when it comes to defense, everything Trump is arguing about NATO or about Korea makes so little sense that I cannot imagine that in the US military, there will not be competent people that will eventually slow him down. And a last point I would like to make is that something we can remember from Trump's negotiations with Kim Jong-un a few years ago about North Korean nuclear weapons is that basically when an issue becomes too complex, Trump doesn't have patience to follow up. Eventually, our best hope is that he just loses interest about defense questions and he gets back to whatever he was doing before.
So one thing that would be clear is that we don't need to panic yet because nothing has been fixed yet, right? Right.
As we always say in French, hope is not, despair is not a political option.
All right, that's really good saying right of now. That's now, Professor Min, pro-Korea members of the U.S. Congress are expected to visit South Korea this week. Given that the Congress can serve as a counterbalance to the Trump administration, do you think this visit could stand as an opportunity to shape future negotiations?
Yes. Personally, I think that it's important for South Korea to enhance its relations with the U.S. members of Congress and business leaders and labor unions, which consist of the various American political actors. As you know, President Trump announced a 90-day pause of reciprocal tariffs on most countries except China. And many experts guess that President Trump made the decision mainly because U.S. business leaders were worried about the uncertainty of American markets. So it shows that President Trump cares about how domestic political and economic actors perceive and respond to his policies. So it could be a useful opportunity for South Korea to improve its relations with the U.S. members of Congress, especially Republican lawmakers, and let them address South Korea's values and concerns to President Trump. And likewise, South Korea can improve its relations with American business leaders, labor unions, state governments, and state politicians. It means that South Korea needed to reach out to more various political and economic counterparts in the United States. And it reflects that as South Korea's economic and technological capabilities get bigger and bigger, it will have more influence in American communities and federal, state, and local levels. So we can see the situation where public diplomacy and lobbying itself are getting more important to maintain and improve our KUS relations.
Definitely. So in moments like this, strong congressional ties could be part of Seoul's strongest asset as well. Now, we will have to wrap up our program at this point tonight. Thank you so much for your insights and your time, Professor Min.
Thank you.
And Professor Godang, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.